So I've got some news for you here. We're going to start a brand new summer series here, not just here online, but in our live services. If you're anywhere close to the area, please come and join us on a Sunday morning. I'm going to be doing the same thing, and it's going to start now. This is the beginning of our summer here in Louisville, and it'll continue on through all the way through August. And hope you join me right here. I think some of the things I'm going to talk about will be of interest to you, maybe even helpful. Who knows? We'll see. I'm going to dive right in this morning and try not to waste any time. The events that led up to the death of Jesus were really pretty dramatic, according to the Bible. Some of the most important teaching in the Bible is condensed into 5 short chapters in the Apostle John's record of the hours leading up to the death of Jesus. After Jesus had told his disciples that he would be gone, and really right after they had shared their very first communion together, because it was the Last Supper, Jesus said these words. And I'm guessing for many of you, you have heard these before. It's in John 14, the first 4 verses. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the place to where I am going. And those words have been preached again and again and again throughout the ages. I know I have done it. Here's the interaction. Jesus says to his disciples, don't worry. Trust me. I'm going to die, but I am coming back, and I will take you to my Father's house. And that's a simplified version of it. Now, I think we can go a little deeper in this dialogue by making sure we are defining words well. You know me. That is a really important thing for me. Defining words the way they would have understood them in the first century when Jesus was speaking to them. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. You know, our understanding of this line in modern America, 2024, that understanding is deeply influenced by the culture of England in the 16th century, 400 years ago, when the King of England, King James, commissioned a new translation of the Bible that became the dominant English translation used in the English-speaking church until less than 100 years ago. So for 300 plus years, it was the main version of the Bible, the King James Version. And the King James Version translation, now again, remember this, used for hundreds of years. And the one many of us, especially we who are maybe a little older, many of us heard at funerals throughout our lifetimes, the one line in this passage, how we heard it, how I heard it growing up, said it this way: in my Father's house, there are many mansions. So many of the hymns that I grew up singing that had been written hundreds of years before me even used the word mansion. We looked forward to the mansions over the hill, this idea of going to heaven and going to my mansion. In my Father's house, there are many mansions. For us now in 2024, the word mansion conjures up the idea of a spacious and extravagant dwelling place. But in reality, in 1611 England, the word translated mansion meant a simple room. Almost the exact opposite of how we use the word mansion. It's crazy how language changes. The Father's house, or God's house, was seen through the lens of medieval ideas of heaven. Even though there's no mention of the word heaven in the entire chapter, we immediately gravitate to that, and the translation of the word mansion factors into that for us. The truth is, in the Old Testament, God's house, or God's dwelling place, which is the only scriptures that they would have had reference to in the first century, God's dwelling place referred to wherever God is, or wherever his presence is made evident and his will is done. God is literally everywhere. So when Thomas, one of the disciples, says back to Jesus, "Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way?" I think Jesus' answer for us today should sound something like, "Thomas, don't worry. Wherever God is, there's plenty of room for you too." I think that's really a more accurate translation of the words that Jesus said. He's saying, trust me, I will take you into God's presence. But the point in his response is that is not a place. The question sort of begs the idea of where is the location that you're going to be and where will you take me? But he's not saying, I'm going to take you to heaven. I think what he's saying is, I want you to come to me. Look at what he says in the next verses 6 and 7. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Here's the real issue for me as I study this passage and think about this interaction that Jesus had with his disciples. I grew up being taught and also then believing the most important question I could ever ask of myself or of anybody else was this one. Are you going to heaven or hell when you die? I had that pounded into my head. Everywhere I looked, every song I sang, And it was throughout the majority of my lifetime. Back then, that's what I was taught. Life was simply about heaven and hell. And the most important thing about it was what happens after you die. So here's a confession. Some of you have heard this before in different ways. But for years, I struggled talking to people about my faith. Even in my early years after I became a minister, I was often scared or embarrassed when I was put on the spot. Not with church people, not with people who came to my turf, but when I was on somebody else's turf. Yeah. I was afraid I wouldn't have the right answers, and even more afraid of looking stupid or being made fun of. The era and church culture I grew up in worked hard to paint the most grotesque and frightening picture of hell that we could paint. And it scared church kids. But the truth of the matter is, it didn't scare unbelievers at all. Most of the time, it just made them laugh. Here's what finally made sense to me, though. When all you're concerned about is whether or not people go to hell when they die, frankly, there is no real urgency. The reality is, unless we know the person, we don't sense the urgency. And even with people that we know, it becomes very quickly out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, there's an urgency on Sunday morning during the sermon, but by Sunday night and certainly by Monday morning, we're in our regular routine and we get on with business. If it's about what happens after a person dies, look, we always think there is more time. That's why this story in John 14 is about more than simply going to heaven after life is over on earth. Here's a question nobody taught me to ask when I was younger. If Jesus is the only way, well, the only way to what? Is it the only way to where? I don't know. But as I have read and reread and studied these words throughout my life, I think according to Jesus' own words, the goal is to be with the Father. The goal is to be where God is. And when you are with Jesus, you are experiencing the fullness of God Himself. The book of Hebrews says it another way. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3 verses. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word. A number of years ago, my words and priorities had a monumental shift as I began to believe life was more than simply avoiding hell when I died, and way more about coming to experience the presence of Jesus in every part of my life. The life Jesus died to give me, well, it was the cake. Going to heaven after I died and after this life was over, well, it became the cherry on top. Everything we are looking for is found in Jesus. Everything we really need is found in Jesus. The way that we get to where we need to be is by following Jesus. Everything we need to know is found in his life and in his example and in his words. And that's what people everywhere need to know. And that's what we remember. Yep, that's what we remember when we share the bread and the juice of communion, just like the disciples did that night a couple of thousand years ago when Jesus taught them this same lesson. Now, isn't that amazing? Till next time, see ya.